Hello, back once again with another fine program called Minnesota Crime Wave Presents. I'm Carl Brookins, one of the three mystery authors who produces and hosts this thing, what do we call this? We call this a program. And the program today consists of three segments. Our guest is author Jess Lowry, a Minnesota and St. Cloud author. And then we'll conclude with our usual ribald discussion, this time about humor in things. Let me introduce my co-hosts. On my left, your right, is Ellen Hart, who writes a series, two series actually, one with Jane Lawless, 25 novels and counting is what we're doing here now, yes, and many, many awards, including 3 Minnesota Book Awards, yes. And she also writes the Sophie Greenway series, which also has some food stuff in it. And if you ask her, you'll discover that food is one of her enduring interests, let's say.
Absolutely.
Our other member of this unholy trio is named William Kent Kruger, an award-winning author of the series set of the Great North Woods of Minnesota. He's over here on my right, your left. What can we say about Cork O'Connor, except that he's a very moral, upright man who gets himself into a lot of trouble because he's kind of unbending in some ways. Is that a fair?
No.
No?
I don't think of him that way at all, but then I know the guy very well.
That's true.
I'm a little too close to him.
But on the other hand, I read him quite well. Beginning, I guess, with Agatha Christie, or at least in her era, settings for mystery fiction became stylized and even ritualized to a degree. Small towns, limited settings, their pluses and minuses pose particular challenges for the mystery author. So we're going to talk about generics. And so my first question to Kent is do you think there's a so-called generic Main Street setting?
I think that's no more true than if you said there's a generic protagonist or generic plot or generic any other significant element to the crime genre. There are similar elements if you're dealing with a small town setting. It's going to be a limited landscape that you're working with. Oftentimes it's going to be kind of an homogenized culture, but it's going to be as quirky in its own way as people are from each other. So unless you're in the New York publishing business and everybody in New York believes that everything on this side of the Hudson is all the same, those of us who know small towns know that they're all interesting and different in their own unique ways. That's my take on it.
I see. But that's interesting. But there are 8,000. I don't know how many, but there are 8,000 small towns in a.
Yeah, but a small town, take Battle Lake, Minnesota. That's going to be a very different setting from Skunk Holler, Arkansas. Very different people, very different issues, whole different texture to all of the natural things that are going to go on, and probably all of the interests that the people have. Now that said, they're all going to be concerned probably about family. They're all going to know their neighbors. They're probably going to know their neighbor's business. These are things that don't necessarily take place in a large city, but all of those neighbors and all of those families and all of those individuals involved in that are going to be very different, one town to the next.
I think someone like Garrison Keillor has produced a template, in a sense, for a small town Minnesota in Lake Wobegon. But even in that, these characters are very idiosyncratic and very strange and doing all sorts of odd things. But we have a cafe and we have a bar and we have some very standard things that you'd find in a small town. But then you find the richness, and I think that's true for mystery novels too. I do think that the limited setting, however, is fairly standard in terms of a cozy mystery. And it doesn't, I mean, there are lots of limited settings. For instance, in the English edition, there was the mystery set in the country house. Lots of country
English
house
country
mystery.
house.
Right. And then you've got...
With the cat.
Yeah, and the island.
And the tea cozy, which
Right,
is where it comes
and
from.
the island. My first mystery was set in a sorority because it was an insular setting, and I guess I thought that's what I wanted to do at that time. I don't do that now, but my second book was set on an island, and you know I wanted that sort of limited setting so that I could limit the suspects and so that we had a chance to really look at everybody. And I loved that. That's what I was reading back then, and I think my writing reflected it.
You know, you brought up Lake Wobegon, which is what everybody outside Minnesota thinks of as
Yes.
probably the quintessential Minnesota small town, but Lake Wobegon is as different from Aurora, Minnesota, which is what I write
Yes.
about, as probably New York is from LA, you know?
Why doesn't somebody write about a small town that doesn't exist anymore? I mean, in the sense that the cafe is closed, the bank is closed, the grocery store is closed, the people who use that small town, there's only maybe a gas station now, and everything else is almost or really closed. Wouldn't that be a whole interesting, different kind of a challenge?
Been done.
I think it has
The
been.
Last
Is it?
Picture Show,
Well-
Larry McMurtry.
Well, that,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah, but I would imagine that has been done and will be done,
Sure.
especially with the financial crisis we're in right now. You know, we lost Iceland last week, so you know, we're going to lose some small towns.
Do you see any particular, apart the fact that you've got a limited number of people, the fact that you have a limited geographic area, do you think that works is that a serious challenge, or does that just actually help the author control the environment?
I think it's a plus for both the author and the audience, because for the author, every time you sit down to work, if you're an author of a series, every time you sit down to create a new work, you're not starting from square one. You've already established the territory, you've already very much established your cast of characters, and the reader comes to that series knowing the landscape, knowing the characters, and feeling very comfortable. That's one of the things about a small town setting. It's a very comfortable environment for me to work in as an author, but for readers to come to as readers as well.
But that's assuming it's a series. What if it's a standalone? What if it's a single novel?
See, to
Same
me,
thing?
small towns are full of strangeness and eeriness and potential, potential problems that. I mean, I listened to my partner who came from a small town talk about the different people in that town and how they were ostracized. I mean, to me, a small town is about as rich a setting as you can find.
Do you know, I would think that what a fine author does is take that idea that this is going to be a generic setting and
Turn it on
turn
its
it on
ear.
its head.
Yeah.
Well, it raises about 16 more questions that I can think of offhand, but you know what? We're going to move on now. So we'll come back to this subject.
That was fun.
Because
That
we could spend more time speculating about it. We'll return shortly with our guest, Minnesota mystery author Jess Lowry, who does write about a small town, and a writer who's taken a somewhat different approach to her novels. Just a minute. Our guest is Jess Lowry, who grew up in Paynesville, Minnesota, a not large community in Minnesota. Went to high school, college, now living in St. Cloud, Minnesota with her 2 children, teaching literature and sociology at St. Cloud Technical College, a member of Midwest